The chandeliers of Carlton House burned like captured stars, their light spilling over silk gowns and glittering diamonds that swayed with each graceful turn of the dance. Music wove through the air, a cascade of violins and laughter, yet beneath that golden veneer lay the hum of whispers sharp enough to wound. Lady Eleanor Whitcomb stood near the edge of the ballroom, her gloved hands folded so tightly they trembled. Her lavender gown, simple, though cut with taste, was outshone by the sequined splendor of duchesses who glided past her with the unthinking ease of wealth. She had been invited only because the Dowager Viscountess of Alderton, her aunt, had insisted upon her presence, arguing that every young woman of good breeding must be seen, however modest her means. But visibility in such a world was perilous. "Poor creature," murmured a voice nearby, the words brushed with sugar and venom alike. "Her father squandered his fortune on horses and cards, they say. It is almost charitable of the regent to allow her presence tonight." Another titter followed. "And her gown. The shade of wilted lilac, how apt for a family in decline." Eleanor kept her gaze upon the floor, her cheeks burning though her posture remained resolutely composed. To show hurt was to confirm inferiority. She had learned this long ago, in the long months after her father's debts had cost them their estate, their reputation, and nearly their dignity. Her mother, before illness carried her away, had often said, "A Whitcomb may lose her fortune, never her bearing." Yet in this glittering hall, surrounded by those who measured worth in diamonds and dowries, Eleanor felt her composure hanging by a thread. Across the room, conversation shifted like a current around a single figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair touched with the faintest curl, and his uniform replaced by the black and silver of formal court attire. The Duke of Rothwell, Alexander Hawthorne, stood in quiet conversation with Lord Bathurst, his presence commanding but unassuming, as though unaware of the many gazes fixed upon him. He had returned only recently from the Peninsula Wars, where he had distinguished himself in both courage and diplomacy. There were whispers he had the ear of the Prince Regent himself. Eleanor had seen him once before, fleetingly, during a charity gala. What struck her then had not been his title, nor even his handsome composure, but the stillness about him, the sense that he was a man observing rather than performing, as though he carried battlefields still within his mind. Now, as fate would have it, his gaze shifted across the crowded floor and found hers. For one impossible second, she thought he looked directly, deliberately, at her. Her breath caught. She turned away, pretending to examine the gilded clock upon the mantel, though her heart thudded like a trapped bird. "Lady Eleanor Whitcomb," announced a smooth baritone. She looked up. He stood before her, bowing with precise civility. The murmurs around them faltered into silence, so faint it might have been imagined. "My Lord Duke," she replied, curtsying low, her voice steady though her pulse betrayed her. "I believe," he said, with a glint of wry humor, "it is only fair that we both suffer the indignity of conversation. You appear as misplaced here as I feel." His tone was gentle, not mocking. Eleanor managed a small, surprised smile. "Then perhaps, Your Grace, we might form an alliance of mutual discomfort." A flicker of amusement touched his eyes. Gray, sharp, but kind. "Agreed. And if I may say, Lady Eleanor, discomfort has rarely looked so dignified." The words should have sounded flirtatious, but they did not. They were spoken with a sincerity that disarmed her. Yet sincerity itself was dangerous. She had been warned since girlhood. Admiration from powerful men could destroy a woman's reputation far quicker than malice. Still, as they conversed, about the portrait collection lining the ballroom, about the music, about anything that could safely mask the current between them, Eleanor found herself forgetting to guard her every word. For a few moments, she felt not judged, nor pitied, but seen. Their conversation ended when a countess swept in with feigned surprise, exclaiming, "My Lord Duke, you will quite ruin the dance if you monopolize the wallflowers." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Eleanor bowed her head, humiliation rising like heat beneath her skin. Rothwell's expression hardened, but propriety bound him. He inclined his head to Eleanor, murmuring, "Forgive them their cruelty. It is the only wit they possess." He was called away, and she was left standing amidst the smirks of women who would dine upon her mortification for weeks. Later, when the carriages clattered away and silence reclaimed the night, Eleanor sat before her small mirror in the guest chamber her aunt had secured within the house of a distant relation. She removed her pearls, each one slightly uneven, imitation by necessity, and set them upon the dressing table. Her reflection appeared pale and tired, her eyes too large in a face accustomed to concealment. She reached for her reticule to retrieve a handkerchief and instead found something soft pressed within, a man's glove, white kid leather, embroidered discreetly with the crest of Rothwell. For a long moment she simply stared at it, certain she must have imagined its presence. But no, the faint trace of sandalwood lingered. A message without words. A gesture without presumption. Her hand trembled as she held it. She knew the risk of such a token. Were it to be found, it could be construed as evidence of impropriety. Yet she could not bring herself to discard it. It was not vanity that stayed her, but gratitude, the simple, aching gratitude of being regarded with kindness, not pity. From the street below drifted the fading echo of laughter, ladies returning from some late supper, their voices carrying fragments of gossip. Eleanor could almost hear them. The poor Viscount's daughter thinks herself admired. Imagine her delusion. She pressed the glove against her heart, ashamed of the tears that came unbidden. At that same hour, in a chamber several streets away, the Duke of Rothwell stood by a window overlooking the city, his hand bare, his expression thoughtful. The candlelight carved his face in sharp planes, revealing not arrogance but weariness, the kind born from a life of duty and public scrutiny. He had given her the glove on impulse, a gesture neither strategic nor wise, but profoundly human. For reasons he could not yet name, he found himself thinking not of war or politics, but of the quiet strength in the eyes of a woman whom society dismissed as inconsequential. Back in her room, Eleanor finally placed the glove inside a small wooden box, her only keepsake from a life once filled with possessions, and whispered softly to the empty air, "It means nothing." But the words rang hollow, even to her own ears. When she blew out the candle, the room sank into darkness, and only the moonlight remained to bear witness. The narrator's voice, if one could hear it, might have murmured. In that single act of keeping what she should have destroyed, Lady Eleanor Whitcomb crossed the invisible threshold that separates prudence from peril. Her ruin would not begin with scandal or sin, but with sentiment. Outside, rain began to fall over London, washing the dust from the cobblestones, blurring the reflections of the carriages that carried its glittering aristocracy home. Days unfurled like silk ribbons, each one looping back upon the last, until the scandal of Carlton House seemed to fade, at least to those who had never truly cared. Yet in the wake of that glittering night, a quiet transformation began. Lady Eleanor Whitcomb, though outwardly composed, found herself haunted by a memory she dared not nourish. The Duke's voice, low and sincere, and the white glove now hidden among her few private treasures. It should have been a trifle, easily forgotten. But in a life governed by restraint, even a trifle could bloom into danger. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of court resumed, its endless processions of laughter, envy, and elaborate civility. Eleanor attended only when duty compelled her, aware that her presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. The Dowager Viscountess urged her to smile more, to flatter the right patrons, to appear grateful for every crumb of attention. But Eleanor, though obedient, carried within her a growing fatigue, the ache of one who performs a role no longer believed in. One gray morning, as frost clung to the palace gardens, she found an envelope slipped beneath her prayer book. Its wax seal bore no insignia, yet the handwriting was unmistakably masculine, firm, deliberate, yet unostentatious. Within lay a folded note and a sprig of violet, pressed and delicate. The note contained only 5 words, "For courage, in a cruel place." Her pulse stilled. She read the line again, searching for meaning she dared not presume. It could be anyone. It could be him. The thought both steadied and unsettled her. In that world of courtly artifice, sincerity was a rare and precious coin, and dangerous to spend. She hid the note at once, but all that day, she carried the faint scent of the violet against her skin like an unspoken promise. 2 evenings later, at a small musicale hosted by Lady Pembroke, fate, or folly, intervened. Eleanor arrived late, hoping to slip unnoticed into a quiet corner. Instead, she found herself directly across the room from the Duke of Rothwell, who stood surrounded by a cluster of officers and courtiers, his expression courteous yet detached. When their eyes met, the hum of conversation seemed to fade into nothing. He gave no outward sign of recognition, only the faintest incline of his head, yet the message was clear as speech. He had not forgotten. Later, during a pause in the music, a servant discreetly approached her with a small, leather-bound volume. "A gift for Lady Whitcomb," he murmured. She opened it and found a slim book of poetry, Byron's The Giaour, with no inscription but a single mark beside one verse. He knew himself a villain, but he deemed the rest no better than the thing he seemed. She felt the blood rise to her cheeks. To the unknowing, it was simply a fashionable token. To her, it was revelation. For a time, they exchanged no words beyond what civility demanded, yet their silence grew charged with its own eloquence. A glance across a corridor, a pause too long before parting. It was as if the air between them carried confessions neither dared to voice. Rothwell, once regarded as aloof, began to appear at gatherings where Eleanor was present. Always proper, always restrained, yet unmistakably near. Society noticed, as it always did. The first whispers began within a week. The Duke of Rothwell favors the impoverished Viscount's daughter. She courts him shamelessly. She hopes to secure herself a title before the season ends. The tone was half amusement, half contempt. And though Eleanor ignored them outwardly, the sting of each word left an invisible mark. Then came the turn. Lady Pembroke, whose vanity was as brittle as her charm, intercepted a letter, a brief note of thanks Eleanor had written in response to the book. It was harmless, even cautious, yet in the hands of envy it became ammunition. Within days, rumor spread that the Duke had compromised a lady's reputation with clandestine correspondence. The regent, priding himself on propriety when it suited him, summoned Rothwell for a word of counsel. The confrontation, though private, shook him. The prince's warning was clear: your rank commands example. Sentiment is a luxury reserved for poets, not dukes. That night, the Duke appeared at a dinner where Eleanor was present but made no approach, no sign, no acknowledgment. His gaze passed over her as if she were air itself. It was the only course left to him, and she knew it. But the knowledge did not soften the blow. When the evening ended, she returned home in silence. The next morning, her decision was made. She would leave London for Bath under the guise of visiting her aunt, far from the court's watchful eyes. It was not heartbreak she feared most. It was disgrace, and worse, the prospect of becoming a burden to the one man who had shown her respect. Before her departure, she wrote one final letter. It contained no plea, no reproach, only gratitude. If affection be a fault, let it be mine alone. You have shown me a kindness I shall remember without presumption and without hope. She sealed it with wax the color of mourning and left it to be delivered after she had gone. On the eve of her journey, she walked alone in the palace gardens, intending to bid farewell in her heart to the life she would never possess. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then insistent, drumming upon marble and laurel alike. Beneath a colonnade veiled in mist, she saw him waiting, uninvited, unannounced. "Lady Eleanor," he said quietly. The rain glistened in his hair, his coat darkened by the storm. He looked every inch the soldier he had been, except now the battle was within. "You should not be here," she whispered. "It is unwise." "Then let it be unwise," he replied. "I came to tell you that I am sorry, for what I said and what I did not say." She shook her head, fighting the tremor in her voice. "You owe me no apology, my lord. You acted as honor demanded." "Honor," he said bitterly, "has little to do with happiness. I have spent half my life defending it and the other half despising it." A pause stretched between them, filled only by the hiss of rain. "You must not speak to me so kindly," she said at last. "It makes parting intolerable." He took a single step closer, though propriety forbade it. "Then let us make it unbearable for both." Her composure broke. For a moment, all the masks they wore for the world fell away, leaving only the truth between them, raw, perilous, undeniable. No kiss passed, no promise was made, yet in that silence they had said everything words could not bear. When she turned to go, her heart felt torn between relief and ruin. He did not stop her. He only watched, his expression unreadable save for the pain it barely concealed. Long after she had gone, The Duke remained beneath the rain until the gardens emptied and dawn began to gray the sky. The narrator, if one were to speak, might have said, "He let her go to preserve her name, not knowing she carried away his peace." And so London, ever hungry for new gossip, moved on. But for two hearts bound by silence, the distance between them was not measured in miles, but in all the words they had never dared to speak. Bath in winter carried an air of gentle melancholy, the kind that clung to the mist rising from the Roman springs and the mournful toll of church bells across the crescent. Lady Eleanor Whitcomb arrived beneath a sky the color of pewter, wrapped in a cloak too thin for the season. The journey from London had been long and cold, yet she had welcomed every mile that widened the distance between herself and the world she had fled. Here, in this quieter city of aging spinsters and polite invalids, she might recover her composure, if not her peace. Her aunt, Mrs. Harrowby, received her kindly but with little curiosity. Bath society, though gentler than London's, was no less observant, and word of Eleanor's withdrawal had already preceded her. People spoke of fatigue, of ill health, of family obligations, any explanation but the truth. The truth, after all, was the one commodity society never trafficked in willingly. Eleanor accepted the half-truths as mercy. Weeks passed in muted routine. Mornings were spent walking along the royal crescent, where the wind swept through the colonnades like sighs of forgotten grandeur. Afternoons brought visits from polite acquaintances who came bearing tepid tea and curiosity disguised as concern. She endured them with grace, speaking little of London and never of the Duke of Rothwell. By all outward measures, she appeared restored, serene, even content. Yet each night, when the house fell silent, she sat by the window with the same small wooden box upon her lap. Inside lay the glove, the violet, and the note, tokens she both cherished and despised. Sometimes she imagined he had forgotten her entirely. Sometimes she prayed that he had. To be remembered by him was to live in torment, to be forgotten was to vanish. And yet, as winter deepened, she began to sense a restlessness she could not name, as if the air itself held something unfinished. One afternoon, she accompanied her aunt to the pump-room, where the fashionable gathered to sip the mineral waters and exchange tidings. The chatter was lively. News of the regent's latest indulgence, of marriages arranged and broken, of a new portrait of the Duke of Rothwell unveiled at White's. The mention of his name struck her like a physical blow, though she kept her composure with practiced calm. "They say," one matron whispered behind her fan, "he is soon to be betrothed to Lady Honoria Ashcombe. A fine match, by all accounts." Eleanor felt the words slice through her resolve, though she did not flinch. It was inevitable. He would do his duty, and she would fade into irrelevance. It was as it should be. That evening, she walked alone through the misty streets, ignoring her aunt's entreaties to rest. Gas lamps glimmered faintly through the fog, turning the city into a ghostly dream. Somewhere behind her, the steady rhythm of footsteps echoed against the cobblestones. She turned once, twice. No one was there. Still, an unease stirred within her. She quickened her pace, her heart strangely alive. At the entrance to the crescent, she halted. A figure emerged from the haze, tall, familiar, unmistakable. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single vision. The Duke of Rothwell, his greatcoat damp with mist, his expression raw with something between hope and despair. She stood motionless. "My lord," she breathed, the words scarcely sound. He removed his hat, as though before a sovereign. "Forgive me," he said softly. "I know I have no right to seek you here, yet I have sought you nonetheless. How did you know where to find me?" He smiled faintly. "I did not. I only followed what peace would not give me, and it led me here." She could not speak. The air seemed to tremble between them, heavy with everything unspoken. When at last she found her voice, it came out scarcely above a whisper. "You should not have come. The world will think." "Let it think," he interrupted, his tone firm but gentle. "I have obeyed every law but my own heart, and it has brought me nothing but emptiness. If I am to be judged, let it be for something worth the cost." Her composure wavered. "Do you know what you are saying? A duke, defying his station, for me? It cannot be." "Eleanor," he said, stepping closer, I have faced cannon fire with steadier hands than I bring to this moment. Do not mistake my silence in London for indifference. It was cowardice disguised as honor. Tears gathered in her eyes, bright as the rain beginning to fall. And yet, even now, honor must prevail. You have a duty. You have a name. He shook his head slowly. A name is a hollow thing, if it is all that remains of a man. You once said affection was your fault alone. Allow me, at least once in my life, to share the fault. She pressed her hands together, as though in prayer. If I believed you, she whispered, I would never have the strength to let you go again. Then do not, he said simply. Please, don't leave me. The words fell between them like a vow, quiet yet thunderous. In them lived every restraint broken, every pretense abandoned. The city around them vanished. Only the rain, the gaslight, and the trembling of her heart remained. Eleanor's breath hitched. For a long, aching moment she said nothing. Then, with deliberate grace, she reached out and laid her gloved hand upon his arm. The gesture was small, almost invisible, but in that restrained world, it was an act of defiance greater than any declaration. You do not make this easy, she murmured. He smiled, his voice unsteady. Nor would I wish to. I mean to make it true. They walked together through the fog, saying little, for words had done enough damage. When they reached the edge of the crescent, he stopped. I have resigned my post at court, he said. The regent will not forgive me, nor will half of London. But I find I no longer care for forgiveness from men who have never known love. Her eyes widened. You would sacrifice all for me? He looked at her, rain running down his face like tears unacknowledged. No, Eleanor. I would reclaim all that was never mine until I found you. The words left her trembling. For the first time since childhood, she felt something like safety, not in walls or titles, but in the quiet certainty of being chosen. When morning came, Bath was alive with whispers. The Duke of Rothwell had been seen escorting a lady along the crescent, his arm offered openly, his expression unrepentant. Some claimed scandal, others, romance. None knew the truth, that the world itself had tilted slightly toward mercy. In the days that followed, their future remained uncertain. There would be letters, negotiations, objections. Yet for all its noise, society's judgment could not undo what had already been spoken. Love, once declared, cannot be recalled into silence. On their last evening in Bath, they stood together beside the window of Mrs. Harraby's drawing-room, watching the rain-trace patterns upon the glass. He took her hand, bare at last, and pressed his lips against it, not as a lover demanding possession, but as a man honoring the only thing he had ever truly revered. Outside, the world moved on, its chatter indifferent to the quiet revolutions of the heart. Yet somewhere, the narrator might have said, history took note, not in ledgers or portraits, but in the invisible ledger of courage, where two names were written side by side. And so their story did not end in triumph or tragedy, but in something rarer, the quiet dignity of love that defied its age and endured.